Before I get started, let me tell you something, a little something about me. I am not from Texas. I'm from Little Rock. I grew up in the cold drink business. My father operated the Barks root beer business in Little Rock, which he started after the Second World War. And I grew up in that industry, learning how to schlep cold drinks all over the planet. But my first job was sweeping the floor, because I was about 12 at that time. He brought me down to work with him in the summers and weekends and so on. And it was boring sweeping the floor. It's not a very challenging job. You don't feel like you have a lot of responsibility, even at that age. And I found that it was not much fun until one day I decided I would sweep the floor, not just better than he'd ever seen anybody sweep the floor before, but better than you imagined anybody could ever sweep a floor. And when I started thinking about life that way, not just for sweeping the floor, but from there on everything else, suddenly what had been boring became interesting, simply because of the challenge of doing it, of making somebody sit up and say, wow, that's not only the best job I've ever seen somebody sweeping the floor, it's better than I ever imagined it could be done. And that's thrilling. And I say that because that's the same way I think of Monty Jones and her team, Matt Heidelbaugh and Bob. These people I have known for years, and I can tell you that's, they're not just up every day working hard, but and with great personalities, but working smart and doing it the best they can. And one of the things they do that I like so much, because I'm into data myself, is they actually use voluminous amounts of data to make their decisions and their choices. And I've never seen anybody have so much access. Cynthia Jeter, who works with them, has access to tons of data, which he's even provided for me, that I'm able to plot stuff out and analyze it. That's the way you do it. That's when you get to the point where you say, I never thought anybody could do it that way. It's just beyond the norm. So you set the new standard. So thank you for inviting me here today, and thank you, Monty, and your team. I also want to ask you a question before I get started. How many people here are originally from Texas? That's probably not the majority. So the other half, how many people, not half, how many people here are originally from some other place? Okay, see, we're more than 50% immigrants. And what Tom was saying about, I like the people, I'm going to clarify that a little bit or elaborate on it. I like the fact that you're immigrants. And what does that mean? That means that you have, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. That means that you have come here to do something, not for welfare. You've come here to make a better life for yourselves and your family. You're entrepreneurial, you're hardworking, you're optimistic. That population of people is different here. We have a different population of people because we've run a filter through the economy and collected a relatively large number of those people. After you do that, and when you set in place the things which we're going to talk about today, to run that filter, from there on, things can be very different. On the other hand, if you look at some of the places in the nation which are left with the people who didn't decide to move and are still hanging on, they're going to have a different experience as well. So that's what's happening here. People are coming to Texas looking for the new world. Now, you're going to see this report I'm going over. If you need more of these, let me know at SMU. Just simple email wmcox@smu.edu. I'll try to get them to you. They do cost us a little to produce, but if we, you might ask you to pay for $1 or something for them if we run out. But here we go today, talking about looking for the new world. Notice that this car here I've got here has got a California license plate on it. Sorry, Joe. This is not going to be the most pleasant thing for you, but I know you've read the report, so you know what's coming. It's got a California license plate and the sign that says, "Welcome to Texas." This is the #1 migration that's occurring in the United States. Over the past 5 years for which we have data, America is witness to the largest single migration in history as a matter of record. Never before that we know of have so many people moved from state to state. They're looking for the new world, the new world. Many of them would be inclined to leave the nation, I believe, But before they leave the nation, they're going to at least move from one state to another. The thing that they would try to escape at the national level, they can also escape partially at the state level. And that's what we're going to find out what it is. So I'm going to go over this report and the one of a previous year. This says, okay, why when they move to Texas are they moving to DFW in particular? This is employment in the United States indexed to 100 in the year 2001. As you can see, we had a gain to where employment increased for about 3 to 4% on net during this first 8 years of the last decade, but now it's down. And in fact, there are fewer people working in America today than in the year 2001. We've had already one lost decade. And at current growth rates, we'll have at least another lost decade, and it will take to about 2023 to get as many people back in jobs in America as we had at the peak of that 2008 business, 2007, December 2007. So, the U.S. is having some trouble, there's no doubt. But that does not apply equally across the nation. As you can see, when you divide employment up by Federal Reserve District, there are 12 Federal Reserve Districts. Dallas District is all of Texas, the northern part of Louisiana, and a piece of New Mexico. We have really pulled out ahead of everybody else in the country here. The Dallas Federal Reserve District is beating everybody with a 10 or 11, 12% growth, whereas Chicago has had 8% contraction in the number of jobs. It's Cleveland bad too. If you write down job gains and losses by state, well, we have added more jobs over this 12 years, inclusive of the endpoints. It starts in January 2000 and goes to December 2011. We added more jobs than the entire rest of the nation combined. Florida's second, but we got 4 to 5 times their job creation. So it's happening here. Texas is the number one state gaining people as folks migrate across the nation. Here are the top 15 states. The red bar shows there that we gained some of our immigrants from abroad. The blue is we gained from other states, and the black is a total bar. So we're first, and then North Carolina and Georgia. Here are the top 15 losers. Number 1, California. Added some people from abroad, but they lost those and many more as the migrants, the domestic migrants, went elsewhere. California, number 1 in terms of people lost. New York, then Michigan, New Jersey, Illinois, Ohio. Louisiana was Katrina. That won't happen again. But you can see we're back to the same model. Massachusetts, Maryland, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and so on. Those are the states which have lost people. Where do people come from when they move to Texas? I'm going to show you net migration. This is the top 15 states from which Texas gets people net. California, number 1, with double that of Louisiana. That's Katrina. Erase that, and you got more than triple that of Florida. So these are the top 15 states from which we get people. Here are the top 15 states to which people go when they leave Texas. "89 people left Texas for Washington, D.C. during the Bush administration. But they're back. So we're like, it's just, you come here and you don't leave. And here I am 27 years after I moved here. I wouldn't think about leaving. What is so great about Texas? Let's think about it. We know there's some interesting terrain here. The bluebonnets are beautiful. We have desert. If you like a very varied climate and weather, we have, terrain, we have that. We have desert. We have swamp. That's this Cato Valley, Cato River, or whatever. I'm not sure if it's a river, but Louisiana. We have Palo Duro Canyon. So we have, something like a Grand Canyon look-alike. We have the piney woods of Texas. We have beaches. We have mountains, Guadalupe, around 9,000 feet. We have beautiful sunsets. We have beautiful flora. And we have the Marfa Lights, which is a fun trip out to around Fort Davis, California. Fort Davis, Texas, a fun place to go if you want to see the darkest place in North America. Can't even see your hand in front of your face. It's an interesting trip. Watch the stars. We have all this. We have what most people apparently think is the most interesting shape of any state in the nation. And not only do people congregate in our shape, but they make all kinds of objects out of our shape. Waffle irons, buns, even gravestones, paved stones. People see Texas as an apparition in their meat sometimes. And there are some things about Texas which are pretty unusual. We have the world's largest state capitol building, the world's largest honky-tonk. The King Ranch is bigger than the entire state of Rhode Island. The first jalapeno pepper jelly, 75% of the world's Snickers bars made here. It's at Waco. And it's illegal to put graffiti on cows in Texas. It's legal to carry a gun in your pocket, but not a fence cutter. So, you know, there's a lot of these Texas trivia books, and they're kind of fun to look at. But if you want to get scientific about this and think, well, maybe that's not is that really what's attracting people here? Probably not. Let's try to figure it out. So what we did is we tested 20 variables, went through our mental list of what are all the reasons people say that Americans migrate from one place to another. Why do they move? You see all these new license plates showing up in Dallas regularly, all from all over the country. Why did you do that? And so we tested a lot of things, some of which didn't work. I'll show you some of the things first which did not work. When I say it didn't work, it means it did not have statistically significant explanatory power at the 95% level, which means you cannot be 95% sure that this factor is what's driving people to Texas. I love it when the waiter staff listens. That means I'm doing a good job. It's even interesting for them. This is international visitors for pleasure. This is the best marker I know for whether people think Texas is a place you want to come and visit for fun or for whatever people come to visit for. Some people want to come for amenities like the mountains or the beach. Some others want to come for shopping or see the Rangers play or go to Six Flags over Texas. Whatever it is, people sort themselves out, and they've decided that they'd want to go to Hawaii. And 1,548 people visit Hawaii every year for every 1,000 people who live there. So it's really like France. It's a tourist mecca, and it's not a normal state. And probably growing up there, you don't have a normal opinion about what the rest of America's like. Nevada second, and so on. Texas is pretty high on the list of states that attract people from abroad for visiting. But it turns out this variable was not significant. Good news for Mississippi, because only 5 people visit Mississippi from out of the country for every 1,000 who live there. Also, the unemployment rate did not seem to be significant in directing migration across America. And there we didn't score very high. We had a higher unemployment rate than 2/3 of the other states. Had that number been important, the folks would have gone to Hawaii at 3% unemployment rate. But apparently people either feel they're moving as a part maybe of a block move with the company where I already know I got a job, you're moving all of us, or I don't feel like the aggregate unemployment rate for the state applies to me. It's too general a number to apply to me in the specific industry. It didn't matter to people what the unemployment rate was in their decision to where to move. How about earnings per job? Here we fare pretty well. We're 3/4 of the way up in terms of the average earnings per job, with an average of about $52,300 at the time of this study. That was far above 75% of the other states, but it didn't matter to people. Again, it could be their own unique experience, their own unique income, and not that of the aggregate on the state that which they looked at in deciding whether to come or go. A small business failure index. Our businesses don't fail very often here compared to the rest of the country, where we rank 6th from the top. Fewer businesses fail in small businesses in South Dakota than anywhere else, and the most in New Jersey. We score good on this, but still that wasn't the thing that drove people to the state, and it wasn't crime either. Our crime rates are relatively high, about the 73rd percentile or so on. But although as Tom said, they're falling, that wasn't something folks looked at when decision to move. So we tested these variables and 20 more to figure out what's driving migration across America. And so here's what we found. We found that 6 variables explain 2/3 of all migration. Here they are, starting with the most important one, and that is the individual income tax rate, the highest marginal income tax rate. Americans apparently feel that the services that they get for the income taxes that they pay are not worth it, and they're especially at the state level. And so they're leaving states, and there are 7 of them. They're leaving states with high income taxes, like Massachusetts with the 12% income tax rate, in addition to your federal, Hawaii 11, Oregon 11, California 10.6, and so on, New Jersey 10.8. And they're moving to one of the 7 states with no income taxes. We're one of those. And I can tell you that was a reason I moved. One of the reasons I moved here 27 years ago. And the way that you think, if you live in New York now and you make an average of $60,000 a year, your move to Texas saves you enough income tax that you don't have to pay. That you just like move to Texas and get a free BMW every 5 years for the rest of your life, because that's a car payment. Your taxes equal a car payment on a 3 Series BMW. And so that's a powerful incentive. Hey, I could just eliminate my car payment by moving from New York to Texas. Very important variable, and was dominant. Union membership was about equally important with taxes. Folks are looking for right-to-work states. They don't want to, be told you have to join a union and pay union dues. They just want a job, and in particular, companies want to leave our union states where workers tend to get less productive over time because they're protected from competition, and they want to move their company to non-unionized states where folks actually have to get up thinking about how they're going to do their job better in order to keep their job and their company be successful. And that's what drives progress in the long run anyway, is progress of human productivity. So that's very good for a state to have a low percentage of your labor force in the private sector which is unionized. 27.5% of the private sector labor force in New York is unionized. 75% of their public sector labor force is unionized. For us, the numbers are 6 and 14, but it was the private one that mattered. 6% of the labor force unionized. The right-to-work movement started in Texas. It was identified here by a Dallas Morning News reporter. It was first labeled that right to work, but now less than half the states in America are states where individuals have a right to work, but we're one of them, and that's good. I mean, this is why Boeing wanted to move their plant this way. This shows you that the right-to-work states in yellow here tend to be ones which have a small fraction of the labor force unionized. So that was good. The 5-year trend in state and local spending per capita. This shows you how fast the state's budget spending is growing relative to the average across all states. So our state budget is not growing as fast as average. Average would be 1. We're 90% of average, not 100% of it. Some states are growing faster than average, others less than average. This mattered to people. Apparently people feel like if they live in a state where they see their budget growing all the time, ultimately we know where this leads to higher taxes, so we're just going to leave now. Things aren't going to get better. Here's another very important variable, the average price of a single-family home. The average price of a single-family home in California during this time period was $448,000. It's $148,000 in Texas, a third the price. Californians have successfully got together and pulled a neat trick to appreciate the value of their own personal property, and that's put land use restrictions on the remaining not used property. So if you can't move into that, you have to move into my house. How much, it's $448,000. Prices go up, that might give them a capital gain, but they have to how do you capitalize on it? You leave and you go somewhere else. And then the other person who's contemplating moving into California now at the high price faces a barrier, and so it's not good for population. It causes an exodus and an entry here to Texas. The next variable that mattered to people were the quality of the public schools. And math and reading scores at the 8th grade seem to be the variable that people key in on the most as to decide whether or not the schools are good to move there. Now, you might, for many of us, we can afford private schools, so we probably could ignore this, but most folks can't ignore it and don't ignore it, and we'll look at the quality of the public schools when they decide where to move. Texas could improve. We're below halfway down on this, but we're better than California. So I keep picking on California because it's the largest state in America, and we're trying to explain why did so many people move from California. Standard deviation of monthly temperature was the final variable. In other words, the weather. But the weather variable that mattered to people it's too hot or it's too cold. People don't mind hot, they don't mind cold, but they do mind both at the same place. They can't get used to wide swings in temperature variation, and temperature variation. The record temperature variation in America for any one state is 181 degrees, from minus 71 to plus 110. That's North Dakota, but that's just the record. On average, Minnesota has the most variable, slightly worse than North Dakota, most variable weather. So just as soon as you get finished with cold, you go back, you go these, really hot, sweltering summers. Not good. People don't like it. But we have hot here, but it's consistently warm, and, that's okay. Two more variables showed some promise. By promise, I mean they were statistically significant at the 90% level. We can be 90% sure these things matter, but not 95%. And so I'll show you what those are. And they're transfers and subsidies as a percent of GDP. How much money does the state spend transferring, how much effort does the state make transferring money from the rich to the poor? Say for immigrants. You might think Texas, with a lot of people crossing the border, has a lot of folks who come up here for welfare, and we're generous with welfare. The answer is no. Only 3.7% of gross state product is transferred like this, and that's low relative to average, and that's interesting. But what the most interesting thing is, it's interesting because it defies the conventional expectations about our welfare system here, which is not generous. But it's more interesting because to the degree this thing is significant, the sign on it is minus, which means that if you're a state who engages in this kind of tax and transfer activity, it works against you. More people leave the state trying to escape the tax and transfer scheme than who come to the state to be a recipient of the welfare benefit. So it works against you, and it's good, therefore, that we are not doing this. And then the final thing was the tort liability index. Texas has been improving its court system to getting away from getting toward things like loser pays. I think this variable will show up significant in the next cut at the data, because every time I talk to people, especially in the medical industry, but in other industries, they talk, this is one of the reasons we moved to Texas. It's a more litigation-friendly environment, anti-litigation environment. So those are the two that mattered almost, but not quite yet. If you wanted to know what the equation looks like, this is what the point is, that migration, M here, can be predicted on the state's taxes, its unionization, its government spending growth, quality of the schools, housing prices, and climate. And you can compare estimates of how many people would move to actual values. 2/3 of the migration can be explained by that. Let's compare them. So on the horizontal axis, I have the gain we would estimate a state would have based on its markers for taxes and unions. And on the vertical axis, we have the actual gain it did have. And as you can see, most of the dots lie in the quadrants they're supposed to. Where you think there's supposed to be a gain, there is a gain. And where you think the people are going to be leaving, yes, they are leaving. But a couple of interesting things to note here are that New York is losing more people than you would even think they would be losing, and California is losing even more than people you think they would be losing on the basis of the things we've been able to identify as important. And Texas is getting even more people are moving here than you think would be. So something, we've got 34%. We can't explain whatever it is, whatever things it is, are still working in Texas's favor. That's the good news. And the bad news is for California and New York is they're still working against them. It might be proximity to the middle of America, as Tom was saying, and I'm going to try that to see if that's, when I get some data on that, to see if that can help. But the bottom line of this right now is that good things are happening for us here in Texas, and folks are coming here for jobs. If you get this right, get these policies right, what a difference it can make. You can, in a decade, increase your population 7.4%, which is what happened in Texas during this period. Or in a decade, you can lose 6.5% of your population. For California or New York, almost 10% of your population can leave in a decade. Do that decade after decade, maybe keep raising the tax rates on the remaining people who stay there, and you're circling the drain. You have a bad equilibrium. This is what some states do. Illinois raised their tax rates when some people left. They still needed the same amount of tax revenues to support all the dams and bridges and infrastructure and bureaucracy. And they said, well, there's 10% of you fewer here, and so the other 90% of you have to pay the taxes, the ones who left, and they raised the tax rate. Bad equilibrium for them, a good one for us, because they're coming here and leaving there. So that's what's making people move to Texas in general.